I'm not marrying you.
Jacob's hand hit Andrea's shoulder so hard she stumbled. The bouquet left her hands. White lilies scattered across the altar steps. She grabbed the rail to stop herself from going down completely, and when she straightened up, Jacob was not looking at her. He was looking at the back of the church. 350 people were watching. "I can't marry you," he said. She kept her voice flat. "What are you saying?" "I'm in love with someone else. I've been trying to find the right time to tell you, and there wasn't one. So I'm telling you now." Then the side door opened, and a woman walked through it. Korean. Beautiful in the specific way of someone who had long stopped thinking about it. She wore a white dress and walked straight to the altar and slid her hand into Jacob's like it had always belonged there. "This is Seo Mito," Jacob said. "We've been together for 8 months." I couldn't keep lying. Seo Mito met Andrea's eyes for exactly 1 second, then looked away. The church was so quiet Andrea could hear the altar candles burning. She looked at her mother in the front row, whose face had gone completely still. Andrea shook her head slightly. Her mother sat back. She picked up one lily from the steps. She didn't know why, she just needed something to hold. Turned around and ran back down the aisle through every face she had ever known and pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the cold afternoon. Andrea sat on the top step, still holding the lily. A figure stopped a few feet to her left. Not close enough to crowd her. She could see expensive, perfectly polished shoes in her peripheral vision. She looked up. He was Korean. Tall. A face so precisely structured it looked deliberate. Dark eyes. A groom's suit, complete down to the pocket square. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the street below, his expression giving away almost nothing. Almost. There was something at the corners of his mouth he was holding very tightly in place. "You were in there?" she said. He looked at her. "Different venue. Next door. My security team suggested I should not remain inside." He glanced at the building across the street. "There are cameras. If I stayed looking the way I currently look, the story writes itself." "What happened to you?" "My fiancée sent a message 40 minutes ago," he said. "She will not be attending. She said she was sorry and hoped I would understand one day." Andrea looked at him. "Mine told me at the altar, in front of 300 people, with the other woman already in the building." He introduced her to the congregation by name. The man held her gaze. "That is exceptionally cruel." "Yes," she said. "It is." He reached into his jacket, checked his phone, put it back, and turned to face her directly. "My name is Cian Jae-won. Andrea Peterson." He nodded once, filing it away. "Miss Peterson, I have a problem I need to solve in the next 20 minutes. I am a public figure. My business interests cross 6 countries. The people I deal with watch everything, my strength, my stability, my control. If news spreads that I was abandoned on my wedding day, it becomes a liability. In my world, that costs more than money." Andrea stood up. Something about the word proposal, which she could see coming, required her to be on her feet. "Marry me today," he said. 1 year. A contract. Financial compensation, a place to live, my full protection, and my name, which carries significant weight in this city. You walked out of that church with nothing. I am offering you something. Before we continue with the story, I'd like to welcome you to my channel, Afro-Korean Mafia series by Jasmine. To everyone returning, welcome back, and to our new viewers, I'm glad you're here. This is a place where stories unfold in ways you never expect. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and join our growing community. Kindly let me know where you're watching from in the comments, because this story is only just getting started. The wind moved between them. From inside St. Catherine's, through the thick wooden doors, she could hear the organ beginning. Jacob and Seo Mito were continuing. They were actually going ahead with it. "You're a stranger," Andrea said. "Yes. I don't know what you actually do. I run a holding company. Investments, private security contracting, real estate across 3 continents." She noted the fraction of a pause before he said it. She stored it. "You want me to marry you in?" She checked the watch on her wrist. 16 minutes. "The contract will be on my phone in 8. You can read every line on these steps before we go inside. And if I don't like the terms, then you don't sign and we part ways and I find another solution." He said it without urgency, like a man who had backup plans for his backup plans. "But I think you will find the terms fair." Andrea looked at the church doors. She thought about going back through them alone. She thought about going home to the apartment she had half-packed into boxes for the move she had been planning, and sitting in the middle of all of it and answering every call and explaining every detail. She thought about Jacob's voice at the altar, rehearsed, resolved, relieved, and Sio Mito's hand sliding into his. She thought about 350 people watching her walk out alone. I want my own room, she said. Of course. My own money. Not an allowance. A salary direct to my account. I want to work to earn my living. Agreed. An exit clause. 30 days notice from either party, no penalty. He reached into his jacket and made a call. He spoke in Korean, brief and quiet, and put the phone away. 8 minutes, he said. She looked at him. One more thing. Yes. When we go back in there, she said, I need to know that you will not make me feel like a problem you solved. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. You are not a problem, he said. You are a solution. There is a difference. 8 minutes later, a small, very fast-moving man named Mr. Park appeared at the base of the church steps holding a tablet. Andrea read the contract twice. Every term was exactly as stated. Her room. Her salary. Her security detail. Her exit clause. Nothing physical required beyond the performance of a couple in public settings. Consent required for everything else. She signed. Jae-won signed after her without rereading it. She noticed he had already approved every word before Mr. Park walked over. She filed that away too. Then Seon Jae-won turned to her and held out his arm. She looked at it. She put her hand through it. His forearm was solid and warm under her palm, and he smelled faintly of something that was expensive without trying to be. And she became aware in a way that was entirely inconvenient that this stranger was very physically present beside her. She tightened her grip on the lily in her other hand and looked at the church doors. Walk like you chose this, he said quietly. Just for her. She lifted her chin. Watch me, she said. The doors opened. 350 heads turned at exactly the same moment. Andrea walked down that aisle for the second time that afternoon, and this time she held her head up and her shoulders back, and she looked like a woman who had made a decision and was entirely at peace with it. Beside her, Seon Jae-won did not look around the room. He did not acknowledge the staring or the whispering or the sound of someone near the back making a noise that was almost a gasp. He looked straight ahead and he walked with the measured, unhurried authority of a man who had walked into difficult rooms his entire life and had never once been the one to leave first. The crowd parted without being asked. They reached the altar. The priest looked at both of them with the expression of a man whose theological training had not covered this specific situation. Father, Jae-won said. His voice carried to every corner without effort. We would like to proceed with a ceremony. From the left side of the altar, where Jacob and Seo Mito had been standing seconds away from completing their own vows, there was a sharp sound. A breath pulled in too fast. Andrea heard it. She turned her head. And Seon Jae-won, for the first time since she had met him 24 minutes ago, went completely still. Because the woman in the white dress standing beside Jacob Harrington, the woman who had walked into this church on another man's arm, was Seo Mito. His Seo Mito. The woman who had sent him a message saying she was sorry and hoped he would understand one day had not run away from her life. She had run to a different church on the same street and walked into another man's wedding and called it love. The silence in St. Catherine's reached a new quality entirely. Jacob looked at Jae-won. Jae-won looked at Seo Mito. Seo Mito looked at Jae-won, and then at Andrea, and then at the floor. Jacob looked at Andrea, and then at Jae-won, and Andrea could see him doing the mathematics, the slow arriving at the answer, the understanding settling into his face like something heavy being lowered. Jae-won, Mito started. I don't want to hear one word from you. Kindly remain as quiet as a locked door. Jacob stepped forward. Who the hell are you, and what gave you the right to marry my fiancé? Jae-won turned and looked at Jacob Harrington, studying him briefly in the calm, measured way one might regard a problem that did not require much effort to resolve. Ex-fiancé, you mean? He said evenly. By the way, I'm the groom. Jacob frowned, caught off guard by the quiet certainty in his voice. For this ceremony, Jae-won added matter-of-factly, which is about to begin. He turned toward the priest and inclined his head slightly. Father, please continue. This is not happening, Jacob started. Jacob. Andrea's voice came out clean and completely level, and she surprised herself with it. She looked at the man she had loved for 4 years, and she looked at him clearly, the way you can only look at something when you have finally stopped needing it. I'm marrying this man right here. There is nothing you can do or say to stop this wedding from happening. She looked at him one last time, then shifted her gaze to the woman standing beside him. You two truly deserve each other. Jacob looked at her with something that might have been regret. She looked back at him with nothing at all. There was a freedom in that nothing that she hadn't expected. Mito had not moved. J1. Please. Just let me. Mito. He didn't look at her. You made your choice this morning. I am making mine now. We will speak when there is something worth saying. This is not that moment. The priest opened his book. Andrea stood beside Cian J1 at the altar where she had planned to become someone else's wife, and she listened to words she had memorized months ago for a different ceremony, and she said yes when it was time to say it. Her voice was steady. His was steadier. When Mr. Park produced 2 plain gold bands from his jacket pocket with the quiet efficiency of a man who had clearly prepared for more than one outcome, J1 took the smaller one and turned to her. He lifted her left hand from where it was at her side. His fingers were warm. He held her hand with a gentleness that was careful and deliberate, like he was aware she had already been handled badly today and was making a specific choice not to add to it. He slid the ring onto her finger and held it there for a moment after it was in place. Not dramatically, just held it, like a period at the end of a sentence. Her hand trembled slightly. She felt him feel it. He didn't comment. He just kept holding her hand until it steadied, and then he released it slowly. She took his hand and put his ring on, and her hands were steadier than she expected them to be. The priest pronounced them married. Nobody clapped. Someone coughed in the back. A child asked something in a whisper and was immediately hushed. J1 offered her his arm again. She took it. His hand came up and covered hers where it rested in the crook of his elbow. One brief, warm press, and then he let his hand fall back to his side, and they walked back down the aisle. At the doors he held one open for her. She passed through it, and he followed, and the cold air hit them both, and the doors closed behind them, and they walked down the steps, and the black car was already at the curb with the door open. She got in. He followed. The door closed. The car moved. Andrea pressed both hands flat on her knees and let out a breath that had been living in her chest since the bouquet hit the floor. She stared straight ahead at the back of the driver's seat and breathed and breathed and breathed. J1 sat on his side of the car and looked out the window. He did not speak. He did not look at her. He gave her the full space of the silence, like a man who understood that some things needed air around them before they could be touched. She was grateful for it in a way she couldn't have explained. After a few minutes, she turned her head and looked at his profile against the window. The jaw, the controlled set of his mouth. The way he held himself even sitting down, not rigid, just contained. Like everything in him was accounted for and nothing was being wasted. "Thank you," she said. He turned from the window. "For what specifically?" "For not talking," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to the window and something at the corner of his mouth shifted by a fraction. That was the first time she saw it. The thing he almost let become a smile. The house was in a part of the city where the streets were wide and the buildings had real space between them, and the air felt different, cleaner, like money had purchased even the atmosphere. The car passed through a gate and along a driveway lined with something low and dark and well-kept, and the building that appeared at the end of it was modern and serious and large in the way that didn't need to announce itself. A woman met them at the door. Korean mid-50s, with the efficient warmth of someone who ran things and ran them well. Mrs. Han. She led Andrea upstairs and down a corridor and opened a door to a room with cream walls and a bed that faced a window looking onto a garden and a bathroom through a door on the left. She opened the wardrobe. It was stocked. Clothes in Andrea's size, more of them than she could have expected, in colors that were not chosen randomly. Andrea stood in the middle of the room. "How did you know my size?" "Mr. Cian," Mrs. Han said simply. She said it the way people say, of course, without the words. Someone, in the 8 minutes it had taken for the contract to be drafted, had also been making other calls. She stood with that information and decided she didn't have the capacity to fully process it tonight. "Dinner at 7:30, Mrs. Han said at the door. "The dining room or here. Your preference. There is no requirement." She left. Andrea stood alone in a stranger's house in her wedding dress. She sat on the bed. She looked at the garden through the window. The last of the day's light was moving across it slowly. She looked at the lily she had carried all the way from the church and put it on the bedside table. Then she got up, took off the wedding dress with the careful efficiency of someone dismantling something that no longer served a purpose, and put on a plain shirt and trousers from the wardrobe. She sat back down. She did not eat in the dining room that night. An hour later, Mrs. Han knocked and brought a tray without being asked. Andrea opened the door and looked at the tray. Jollof rice. Rich and red and smelling exactly the way her mother's kitchen smelled on Sunday afternoons. She looked down the corridor. Mrs. Han was already gone. She looked at the rice. She had not mentioned Nigerian food to anyone in this house. She had not mentioned anything to anyone. She carried the tray to the bed and ate it slowly with the garden going dark outside the window, and she did not let herself think too hard about the fact that someone in this house had thought to find out. The first week was mostly silence. She learned the house, the kitchen, which was hers to use whenever she wanted, the library on the second floor with its deep chairs and window that caught the morning light perfectly. The garden she began walking through every morning because it was the one place that felt like it had no agenda. J1 left early and came back late. When their paths crossed, he nodded, and she nodded, and they passed each other like two people sharing a train carriage who had agreed without speaking to keep to their own sides. On the 8th day, there was an envelope outside her room. A schedule, 2 weeks of events, a charity gala, a business dinner, a press appearance. At the bottom, in handwriting so controlled it looked almost printed, "Let me know if any of these create a problem. We can adjust." She kept the schedule and said nothing. The gala was 4 days later. A gown appeared on her bed that afternoon. Dark green. Clean lines. No excess. When she came downstairs at 7:15, J1 was waiting at the bottom in a black suit. He looked at her when she reached the last step. Not a sweep. A single, contained look that moved from her face to the dress and back up, and then he held out his arm without a word. In the car he briefed her who would be there, and who mattered, what story they were maintaining. "If anyone asks how we met," he said, "we were introduced through a mutual connection. We had been speaking privately for several months before it became serious." At the gala the attention was immediate and total. People looked at her with the specific curiosity of those who could not find her in their existing knowledge of him, and that absence made her more interesting than any credential would have. They shook her hand and said how wonderful, and their eyes were very busy. J1 kept her beside him without making it look managed. He introduced her as his wife the same way he introduced any fact, as something already known that the listener was simply catching up to. He placed her into conversations with a hand briefly at her elbow, a slight turn of his body toward her. Small adjustments that communicated without words that she was the center of whatever arrangement they were standing in. She watched how the room responded to him. The way energy quieted when he entered it. The way men who clearly had their own considerable power still oriented themselves toward him when he spoke. She watched it and thought, "I have agreed to stand next to this for a year." A woman named Catherine, sharp, precise, with a smile that lived entirely in her mouth and nowhere near her eyes, spent 20 minutes asking Andrea questions dressed up as admiration. "Where are you from originally? How fascinating. And you and J1. How did you manage to keep this so completely secret?" She said it like a compliment with a hook inside it. Andrea smiled at her with her whole face. "When something is truly important to you," she said, "you protect it. You don't perform it." Catherine blinked. On the way to the next group, J1's hand moved from her elbow to the small of her back. It lasted 5 seconds, maybe 6. Just his palm, warm and steady through the fabric of the dress, and then it was gone and his hand was at his side again. She was not sure he even knew he had done it. She knew. Her whole back knew. She kept her face pointed at the next group of people and kept her expression entirely neutral and noted that her pulse had done something it had no business doing. The business dinner was harder. 9 men older used to deciding things. They watched her the way they watched anything new that had appeared in proximity to power. Assessing, calculating, waiting for the weakness to reveal itself. She sat beside J1 and listened. She could not follow the Korean portions of the conversation, but she listened to the rhythm, and she watched the faces, and she learned things that language didn't require. Midway through the meal, a man across the table said something in Korean with a particular edge, the kind that is meant to land somewhere even when the target doesn't understand the words. Andrea didn't understand the words, but she felt the edge, and she saw J1's hand, which had been resting on the table beside his glass, close slowly into a loose fist and then open again. He replied in Korean. Very quiet. Very short. The man sat back and looked at his drink and did not speak again for the rest of the meal. In the car afterward, Andrea said, "What did he say?" J1 was quiet for a moment. He suggested that a man in my position could not afford distractions. "And you said that the word distraction implies something unwanted." He looked out the window. I corrected his assumption. Andrea looked at her hands in her lap. "Thank you." He didn't say "you're welcome." He turned from the window and looked at her instead, and the streetlights moved through the car in slow intervals, and in each one she could see his face, and then it was dark again, and then she could see it again. "You handled Catherine well," he said. "Catherine was easy," Andrea said. She wanted me to feel small. Small things are easy to step around. He looked at her for another moment. Yes, he said. They are. The car moved through the city. His knee was not far from hers. Neither of them moved. For weeks in, a tabloid connected the dots. 2 abandoned partners. 2 venues on the same street. Same afternoon. The story asked whether C and J1's sudden marriage to an unknown woman was a direct response to being left by C.O. Mito, who had herself married Jacob Harrington the same day. 48 hours, and the story was everywhere. Andrea's face was on entertainment sites. People from her old job were being called for comments. Her phone had not stopped since morning. J1 found her in the library that evening. She was in the chair by the window with her phone face down on the armrest and her legs folded under her, and she was looking at the garden below with the particular stillness of someone managing something large internally. He came in and sat in the chair across from her. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at her face and then at the phone and then at her face again. I can have most of the story managed, he said. The publications involved are connected to networks with relationships with my legal team. Managed meaning silenced. Managed meaning corrected, he said. The version they are printing is incomplete enough to legally challenge. He paused. But there is a more effective approach. Tell me. We give them a better story, he said. A controlled one. An interview. A photograph. Something that makes the tabloid version look like speculation rather than fact. He held her gaze. I want to ask if you are willing. Not tell you. Ask. She looked at him. He waited. He was very good at waiting without pressure. He sat in that chair across from her and gave her the full weight of the decision without leaning on it. Show me the questions first, she said. Of course. They spent 2 evenings going through the interview questions together at the dining room table. He sat across from her with the list on his phone, and she sat with a pen and the printed copy she had asked Mr. Park to send, and they worked through each question. When one of her answers seemed thin, he said so, plainly and without softening it, and she pushed back on 2 of them, and he listened to her push back and conceded on one and held firm on the other, and explained exactly why, and she found that she respected the explanation even while she disagreed with it. By the end of the second evening, the table had 2 empty tea mugs and a plate of biscuits that Mrs. Hahn had left that neither of them had touched, and they had covered every question, and she knew more about how his mind worked than she had learned in the entire 4 weeks before. He knew things about her now, too. That she thought out loud when she was working through something difficult. That she tapped her pen 3 times before she wrote. That she always went back and changed her first answer on anything emotional because she didn't trust it. He noticed all of it. He said nothing. But he noticed. The interview was with a magazine. The editor, Claire Yoon, was brisk and curious and professional. A photographer. A stylist who spent 40 minutes on Andrea's hair and called it an honor and meant it. They sat together on a sofa by a window. The photographer positioned them and repositioned the lighting, and J1 bore it with the patience of a man who had done this before. He sat close enough to her that she could feel the warmth of him through his jacket sleeve. Between shots, J1 leaned slightly toward her and said something low and dry about the photographer repositioning the same lamp for the 4th time, as though a different angle would fundamentally change its nature. She turned to look at him, and there it was again, the thing at the corner of his mouth that almost became a smile. The photographer said he had what he needed. The cover image was from that moment. Her face turned toward his, not quite smiling but on the way there. Him already looking back at the camera, but his mouth carrying the shape of what he had just said. Her phone crashed from notifications. Jacob saw it. She knew because Beezy texted her. Your ex is not okay. She read it and put the phone down and went to find Mrs. Hahn to learn how to use the kitchen because she needed to do something with her hands that was real and ordinary and entirely hers. Mrs. Hahn handed her an apron and did not ask a single question, which was exactly right. The second month arrived differently from the first. They started having dinner together. Not by arrangement. It happened the way things happen when 2 people share a space long enough, gradually and then all at once. She had started cooking on the evenings Mrs. Hahn was off, because cooking was the thing that made her feel most like herself. And the first night she had made a full meal, J1 had come home to the smell of it and appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. He looked at the table she had set. He sat down. She served him a plate because there was already one made, and it seemed wasteful not to. He ate with the focused, unhurried attention he gave everything, and he ate most of it before he looked up. What is this called? He said. Egusi soup. Ground melon seeds. The doughy thing is pounded yam. He looked at the bowl. He ate the rest of it. He put the spoon down when he was finished and said, Tomorrow I have a late meeting. I won't make it for dinner. Okay, she said. The day after, he said, standing. I will be here. He took his bowl to the sink and rinsed it and left. She sat at the table and looked at the space he had occupied, and then looked at her own food, and found she was smiling at her plate for reasons she did not examine too closely. He was there the day after, and the one after that. The dinner conversations started small. Practical things. The schedule for the following week. A question about whether the library chair she used was comfortable enough, or whether she wanted it replaced. A brief discussion about whether the East Garden path needed better lighting. Ordinary things. Safe things. But safety has a habit of making people expand into it, and slowly the conversations became longer. She told him about her work. She was a documentary researcher, currently between projects. And he asked questions that showed he had actually listened to what she said the first time. He told her about a property deal in Seoul that had gone complicated in ways that were professionally interesting even to someone outside his world. And she found herself asking follow-up questions not because she felt she should, but because she genuinely wanted to know what happened next. She learned that he drank his coffee black and his tea with nothing in it, that he read physical books, not screens, and always had two going at once, that he had very strong opinions about how a kitchen should be organized that he had somehow never imposed on anyone else's use of it. He learned that she talked to herself slightly when she was cooking, that she always tasted things 3 times before she was satisfied with them, that she had a habit of tucking one foot under herself when she sat at the table that she clearly wasn't aware of doing. One evening she made suya spiced chicken, and he ate 2 full plates without comment, and when she looked at him across the table he met her eyes and said, "Again next week." "You could just say it was good," she said. "That was more than good," he said simply. She looked at her plate. Her ears felt warm. She was 31 years old, and her ears were warm because a man had said her food was more than good, and she needed to get significantly more control of herself. The 3rd month was when things began to shift beneath the surface. She came downstairs one evening and found 3 men she didn't recognize sitting in the reception room with Jae-won. The conversation stopped the instant she appeared in the doorway. Not the natural pause of an interruption. The deliberate stop of people halting something not meant to be heard. She looked at the 3 men. One of them looked back at her with an interest that settled on her skin like something unwelcome. "I'll eat upstairs," she said. "No." Jae-won said it immediately. Then he looked at the 3 men and said something brief in Korean. 2 of them stood and moved to the door. The 3rd one held his gaze on Andrea for a second too long, and Jae-won said 1 syllable, and the man looked away and followed the others. Jae-won turned to her. 15 minutes. There is something I should tell you." They sat across from each other at the dining table. He poured water for both of them. He did not make her wait. "There are people who find my success inconvenient," he said. "Some of them operate directly. They challenge contracts. They compete. That is normal business." He paused. "Others look for other kinds of pressure points. They have begun looking at you." She held his gaze. "How long have you known?" 3 days. And you've already handled it. The person surveilling you has been persuaded to redirect his attention," he said. "Permanently." She sat with the word persuaded and what it likely meant in his world. "Am I in danger?" she said. He did not rush to reassure her. "Not at a level I cannot manage." "That is not the same as no." "No," he said. "It is not." She looked at him. He looked back. He let her sit with the real answer instead of offering her a comfortable one, and she respected him more for it than she had for anything else. "What do I do differently?" she said. "Don't walk in the East Garden before 8. There's a visibility issue on the wall I'm having corrected. And if anyone contacts you outside of people you already know, tell me before you respond." "Okay." He nodded. They ate. She had made a tomato stew with rice, and he ate it the way he ate everything she made, with a kind of concentrated appreciation that was better than any compliment because it was entirely unperformed. When he finished, he sat back and said, "You used less pepper than last time." She looked at him. "You tracked the pepper. The first version was better." She almost laughed. He stood and cleared both plates, and she watched him and thought, "This is the strangest situation I have ever been in, and I cannot work out when exactly it stopped feeling strange." She used more pepper after that. Jacob called in the middle of the 3rd month. She was in the library when his name appeared on her screen. She watched it ring. Then she picked up. "I saw the magazine," he said. "Most people did." "Andrea." A pause. Are you safe?" "I've been hearing things." "About who he is?" "About what he actually does." She leaned back in the library chair. Outside the window, the garden was doing something beautiful with the late afternoon light, and she watched it while she decided what to say. "You left me at the altar, Jacob," she said. "In front of 350 people. You had been planning it for 8 months. You do not get to call me now and perform concern." Silence. "I made a terrible mistake," he said. "Yes. Being with Mito. I've been thinking." "Goodbye, Jacob," she said. She hung up. She sat with the phone for a moment. Then she went downstairs and found J1 in the kitchen, home unexpectedly, standing at the counter with his jacket already off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was cutting something with the focused efficiency he brought to every task. He looked up when she came in. She sat at the kitchen table. Jacob called. The knife did not stop, but his pace slowed. 1/2 second slower. What did he want? To tell me he was worried about me, and that he'd been thinking. And I hung up. He resumed his pace. He did not say anything. After a moment, he reached across the counter and moved the salt shaker 1 inch closer to her end. She looked at it. He kept cutting. She did not say anything either, but she looked at his hands. The careful, controlled way he held the knife. The way his forearms moved. She looked away before she had been looking long enough to have to answer for it. The 4th month brought Sio Mito to their door. Andrea was in the garden at 8:20 when Mrs. Hahn appeared at the back step. "A Mrs. Harrington at the gate," she said, with the tone of someone delivering professional neutrality about a personally unwelcome message. "Mr. Cian is not here. She says she will wait." Andrea looked at the east wall with its new cameras. She thought about it for 10 seconds. "Put her in the front reception room," she said. She came in, changed her shoes, and walked into the reception room where Sio Mito was sitting on the edge of a chair with her hands folded in her lap. Beautiful. Tired in a way good concealer was almost but not entirely hiding. She looked like a woman living in the aftermath of a decision she had made too fast. Andrea sat across from her. "He's not here," Andrea said. "I know." Mito met her eyes. "I came early because I knew he wouldn't be." A pause. "I wanted to talk to you." Andrea waited. "I didn't know what would happen," Mito said. "When I sent that message, I thought J1 would deal with it. He always deals with everything. I thought he would be angry for a while and then move on the way he always does, to the next thing, the next deal, the next controlled outcome." She looked at her hands. "I didn't think he would marry someone the same day. He needed to protect his reputation," Andrea said. "I needed somewhere to go. It was a practical arrangement." Mito looked up. "Is that still what it is?" "Why are you asking?" "Because I've seen the photographs," she said quietly. "I know how J1 looks in public. I was with him for 2 years. I know exactly how he stands next to people." She paused. "That is not how he stands next to you in those photographs." Andrea looked at her steadily. "He was always working," Mito said. "Always managing something too large to share. I felt like a feature of his life. A very well-managed feature. And Jacob was present. He looked at me like I was the whole point and not a function." She stopped. "I know what I did was wrong. I know that doesn't begin to cover it. I was tired of feeling like an accessory." Andrea considered that. She sat with it honestly before she answered. "Jacob made me feel like the whole point too," she said. "For 4 years. Until I found out that for 8 months he had been making someone else feel the same way at the same time." She paused. "Be careful with a man who makes things feel easy. Easy is not the same as true." Mito was quiet for a long time. "I'm not here to ask for him back," she said finally. "I know that's done. I just needed to see it. All of it." She stood. "I think I needed to know if he was all right." "He's fine," Andrea said. Mito looked at her. That searching look of a woman trying to read a truth through another woman's composure. "Yes," she said softly. "I think he might be better than fine." She left. Andrea sat in the reception room and turned a cushion over in her hands and thought about what Mito had said. Always working. Always managing. I felt like a feature. She thought about a man who moved a salt shaker 1 inch closer without being asked. Who sent jollof rice on the first night. Who said the first version was better, with more pepper, and meant it as a compliment of the highest order. She put the cushion down. She went upstairs and did not mention the visit for 3 days, and when she did mention it, at dinner, she kept it brief. Mito came. We talked. She left. She's not coming back. J1 put his fork down for a moment. Then he picked it back up. What did she say? That she wasn't coming back. That she wanted to know if you were all right. And what did you tell her? That you were fine. He ate. He was quiet for a moment. Was that true? She looked at him. He met her eyes across the table, and the question in them was real and unguarded in a way she was still learning to recognize because it appeared so rarely. "I think so," she said. "But you'd know better." "I'm not certain that I would," he said. She held his gaze. He held hers. The kitchen was quiet around them. He looked back at his plate first. But slowly. The 5th month was when things cracked open. Do-hyun's betrayal came on a Tuesday. One of Jae-won's most trusted men, 6 years, every significant deal, every sensitive operation, had been feeding information to a rival. Not small information. The kind that could be used to time a precise move against everything Jae-won had built. He came home at 11. Andrea was in the library because she had started staying up on the nights he was late without fully examining why. She heard the front door. She heard his footsteps, faster than usual and very tightly controlled, which she had learned meant he was holding something large inside a very small container. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. He appeared in the doorway 10 minutes later. "Jacket off." Tie loosened. He stopped when he saw the kitchen light and the 2 mugs already on the counter and the kettle already going. She pointed at the table. He sat. She made the barley tea he kept in the left cupboard. She put it in front of him and sat across from him and waited. He told her. Not everything. Enough. 6 years. A man he had trusted with things that required trust. Sold. She listened without softening the information or rushing to make it smaller than it was. She asked practical questions. Was he safe? Was the damage contained? Had the rival moved yet? And he answered each one, and she could see him uncoiling slightly with each question because she was meeting the situation at its actual size instead of flinching from it. When he finished, he sat with his tea. 6 years, he said. She nodded. I considered him, he stopped. She waited. She did not fill the silence. She let it sit open. It doesn't matter what I considered him, he said. It does, she said. You don't have to say it right now. He looked at her across the table. Not the brief, contained look she had come to expect from him. A longer one. One that held something she could not entirely name, but that did not make her want to look away. You are good at this, he said. At what? Knowing when to speak and when not to. She looked at her mug. Bad things don't need commentary. They need company. He was very still. Yes, he said. That is exactly it. They sat there in the kitchen at 11:15 at night with their tea and the quiet, and neither of them moved to end it. At some point his hand moved across the table. Not to her. Just forward. Open. Resting on the table between them. She looked at it. She put her hand next to his. Not on top of it. Just beside it. Close enough that the sides of their hands were almost touching. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. They sat like that for a long time. 10 days later, Andrea was coming out of a bookshop on a Tuesday morning when a car pulled up beside her. 2 men got out. Wrong men. Not Sung. Not anyone she recognized from Jae-won's team, and she had spent 5 months learning their faces precisely because she understood, on some level, that it mattered. One of them said her name. She kept walking. He stepped into her path. And Park Sung materialized between them with a speed that was almost architectural. Suddenly there, completely solid, without any apparent transition from not there to there. Andrea kept walking. She heard voices behind her, rapid and low. A door. Silence. Sung caught up with her at the corner. Call him, she said. Jae-won was at the house when she got back, standing in the entrance hall. He looked at her face and then at Sung, and Sung spoke briefly in Korean and left. Jae-won looked at her. Come in, he said. They sat in the reception room and she told him what had happened. She described it clearly and factually, and she was fine all the way to the end of the description. And then the factual part ran out, and what was left was the 3 seconds of standing in front of a man who had stopped her deliberately in a public place in the middle of her ordinary Tuesday morning. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. Andrea, he said. She looked up. He had moved. He was no longer in the chair across from her. He was on the sofa beside her, close, and she hadn't seen him move. He was looking at her with something in his face that was past professional concern, and he wasn't trying to hide it. I am sorry, he said. This is because of me. Because of what I am and what you agreed to. I am sorry. I knew this was part of it, she said. I knew from the 3rd month. Knowing it is possible is different from having it happen in front of you, he said. It was real today. She nodded. He reached over and covered both her hands where they were flat on her knees. His hands were warm and steady and large, and she felt the trembling in her own hands stop within seconds. He did not grip. He did not press. He just covered them. She looked down at his hands over hers. She did not move. Do you want to leave? He said quietly. I will dissolve the contract today. A place of your own, full security that stays with you regardless, a settlement that covers everything agreed and more. You would be safely free. He paused. If this is too much, say so. That is a reasonable response to what happened today. She looked at his hands on hers. She thought about a quiet flat of her own. Ordinary Tuesdays with no one watching. No schedule of events. No cover story. She thought about all of it genuinely, gave it real consideration. Then she thought about the kitchen at 11 at night. The 2 mugs. His hand on the table beside hers. No, she said. He said nothing. I don't want to leave, she said. But I want better coverage on the east side of the street. Not just the garden wall. The street. He turned her hands over gently, both of them, so her palms were facing up. He looked at them for a moment like he was checking for something. Then he held them there, her palms in his, for 3 slow seconds. He released them. Done by tomorrow morning, he said. The 6th month. A man named Shin Byung-ho. A rival. The one behind the surveillance, behind the street encounter, behind the information Do-hyun had sold. He sent a message through an intermediary requesting a meeting. Jae-won went. He told Andrea afterward. At dinner. 4 days after the fact. She put her fork down when he got to the part where Shin's proposed terms had included asking Jae-won to remove Andrea from his public profile in exchange for a 2-year ceasefire. He asked you to set me aside, she said. Yes. And you said. I told him I don't accept terms from men who send others to stop my wife in the street. He held her gaze. And I told him he had fundamentally misunderstood the leverage point. She looked at him. What does that mean? He was quiet. He put his own fork down. It means that the original arrangement has changed. And whatever it has become is not something I am willing to negotiate around. He paused. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I'm aware that saying so changes things without your agreement, and I am not asking you to respond to it tonight. He stopped. I will not be dishonest with you about it. The kitchen was very quiet. I know, she said softly. He looked at her. I know the contract doesn't cover it anymore, she said. I've known for a while. I didn't know what to do about it. Neither did I, he said. They finished dinner. He washed the dishes. She dried them and put them where they went, and they moved around each other in the kitchen with the easy familiarity of people who have shared a space long enough that they know each other's rhythm without thinking about it. She reached past him for a dish towel, and her arm brushed his, and she felt him go slightly still, and then release it and keep moving. When they were done, she folded the towel over the oven handle. He was at the counter. He turned and looked at her. She looked back. He crossed the kitchen in a few steps and stopped in front of her, closer than he had ever stood without a public reason for it. He looked at her face. Her eyes. He lifted one hand and very slowly, very carefully, pushed a strand of hair away from her face with his fingertips. His fingers were warm against her temple. He didn't hurry. He let his hand rest at the side of her face for a moment. She did not move. I need to ask you something, he said quietly. Ask, she said. May I? She looked at him. Yes, she said. He tilted her face up slightly with the gentlest pressure and bent his head and kissed her. It was soft, careful, the kiss of a man who was paying very close attention to every signal and was not going to move faster than he had permission to. She felt the warmth of it all the way down, and she put one hand flat against his chest and felt his heart, and it was not as steady as he looked. He pulled back just enough to look at her. She looked at him. Again, she said. He kissed her again, and this one was less careful. Not reckless. Nothing about this man was reckless, but less held back. His hands moved to her face and her waist, and she held onto the front of his shirt, and neither of them moved apart for a long time. When they did, he rested his forehead against hers. Both of them just breathing. I have been trying not to do that for 3 months, he said. I know, she said. You knew. The lamp, she said. The thing you said about the photographer and the lamp. I saw your face. He made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him. Low, short, genuine. She felt it against her forehead. Go to sleep, he said. But he didn't move. He kept his forehead against hers. You first, she said. He pulled back and looked at her with something in his face that was entirely new, open and unguarded and almost young, and he pressed one more kiss to her forehead before he stepped back. She stood at the oven with the dish towel and watched him leave the kitchen. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor and pressed her back against the counter and smiled at the ceiling for a full minute before she went upstairs. The 9th month brought the crisis. Shin Byung-ho had not accepted Jae-won's refusal. He escalated. He fed documentation to a serious publication, not a tabloid, a real outlet, suggesting the marriage was contractual. He didn't have the full terms. But he had dates. He had Do-hyun's account. He had enough. The story ran Wednesday morning. By 8 they were in the drawing room, Jae-won, his lawyer, his communications team, a political advisor. Andrea stayed upstairs until noon, when Mrs. Han brought her tea and mentioned, with careful neutrality, that Mr. Sean had not eaten since the previous night. Andrea went downstairs and made sandwiches and carried them in on a board with water and set them on the side table without interrupting anything. She went to leave. "Stay," Jae-won said. She sat in the chair by the window. She listened for 2 hours. When a communications director proposed issuing a full denial, she said from her chair, quietly and clearly, "That's the wrong move." Every head turned. Jae-won looked at her. "Go on," he said. "A denial says we're ashamed," she said. "It also gives them something to disprove. They have documentation. They will." She paused. "The question isn't whether this started as an arrangement. It did. That's not the scandal. The question is what it became. So say that. Don't deny the beginning. Tell the truth about where it is now." The room was quiet. Jae-won looked at his communications director. "Write it," he said. "Use her framing." The statement went out at 2. By 5 the narrative had shifted. The story became something different. Not a scandal about a fake marriage, but a complicated, real love story that had started somewhere no one expected. People, it turned out, were very willing to accept complicated. That evening, after everyone had gone, Jae-won found her in the garden. The autumn version of it, all the plants pulled into their winter shapes. He sat beside her on the bench near the east wall. "Thank you," he said. "You were all treating it like a crisis to manage," she said. "It's a story. Stories need a different answer. Where did you learn that?" She thought about it. "I've been learning it for about 9 months, she said. He turned toward her on the bench. He looked at her the way he had in the kitchen that first night, open, entirely present. He lifted his hand and tucked a loose braid back from her face, his fingers warm against her skin in the cold air, and he let his hand rest at the side of her neck. "I love you," he said. 3 words placed as carefully as everything else he said. But this time with nothing held back behind them. No armor. Just the words. She looked at him. The garden was dark except for the lights along the wall. His face was close. His hand was warm at her neck. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while. I kept waiting for it to feel safe enough to say." "Is it safe now?" he said. "You gave me an exit clause on day 1, she said. "You asked before you did anything. You made sure I could always leave." She looked at him. "That's not a man I need to be afraid of." He pulled her toward him, and she went and he wrapped both arms around her, and she pressed her face against the side of his neck and felt him exhale, long and slow, the breath of a man who had been careful for so long and had finally found somewhere to put it down. She held on to him. The garden was cold and quiet, and the cameras on the east wall were invisible and doing their job, and she held on to him, and he held on to her, and neither of them said anything else for a long time because there was nothing left to say that the holding wasn't already saying better. The 12th month arrived. The contract expired on a Thursday. On Wednesday evening, Jae-won came home at a reasonable hour, which had become his habit, and cooked dinner. She sat at the kitchen table and watched him move around a kitchen she had claimed as her own and produce a tteokbokki that was better than it had any right to be. "Your mother," she said when she tasted it. "My mother believes that any person who cannot feed themselves is not ready for serious decisions," he said. "She sounds right. She is. About most things." He sat across from her. "She wants to meet you. She has been asking since the magazine cover." "I'd like that," Andrea said. He looked at her. "Tomorrow the contract expires," said neither of them. But it was there between the dishes on the table, present and waiting. After dinner he washed up. She dried. They put everything away, and the kitchen was clean, and they stood in it together in the quiet. He turned to her. He took her hands in both of his. He looked at them for a moment, and then looked at her. "I am going to ask you properly," he said. "Because you deserve to be asked properly." He held her gaze. "Stay. Not as a contract. Not as an arrangement. As my wife, because this is your home and I have no interest in it without you in it." He paused. "I know you can leave. I need you to know I am asking you not to." She looked at him. She thought about a church step and a lily in her hands and a stranger in a groom's suit who had said walk like you chose this. She had. She still did. Every day since. "I'm already home," she said. He pulled her in and kissed her, and this one was long and unhurried and tasted like something permanent. and when he pulled back he pressed his forehead to hers and stayed there. "More pepper tomorrow," he said against her forehead. She laughed. A real one, the full kind, and she felt him smile against her skin. "Every time," she said. "You say it every time." "And every time," he said, "I mean it more." She pressed her face against his jaw and held on to him in the kitchen that was hers, in the house that was theirs, in the life that had started on the steps of a church with a Lily and a stranger, and a decision that had turned out to be the truest thing she had ever done. Outside, the freesias in the garden were beginning to come up through the cold soil. In 2 weeks they would be open. She already knew he would notice before she did, and she already knew he would say nothing about it, and she already knew the small jar on her bedside table would be full. The freesias came up in the garden 2 weeks after Andrea said yes. She saw them from the kitchen window on a Tuesday morning while she was making coffee, small and white and certain, pushing up through the cold soil like they had somewhere important to be. She stood at the window and looked at them and did not say anything. J1 came downstairs 20 minutes later in his shirt and trousers, jacket not yet on, and stopped beside her at the window with his own coffee. He looked at what she was looking at. He said nothing. But that evening there was a fresh stem in the small jar on her bedside table. She picked it up and held it and thought about the first one, placed there sometime in the second month when she had not been watching, and she thought about how long he had been paying attention before she had known he was. She put it back in the jar and went to sleep smiling. The vow renewal was his idea. He brought it up on a Sunday morning when they were in the kitchen together, her making breakfast, him sitting at the counter with coffee, and the newspaper he still insisted on having delivered physically because he did not trust screens before 8 in the morning. She had stopped arguing about the newspaper. It was one of the things about him she had simply accepted the way you accept weather. "I want to marry you again," he said, without looking up from the paper. She turned from the stove. "What?" "Properly," he said. He turned a page. The first time was 16 minutes of necessity on a day that belonged to someone else. "I want to do it again. The right way. With time and intention and your family present." He looked up. "If you want that." She looked at him. He held the newspaper in both hands and looked back at her with a particular steadiness that meant he had thought about this for a long time before saying it. "You want a real wedding," she said. "I want a real wedding," he said. She turned back to the stove. She moved the pan. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. She heard him put the newspaper down. "Yes," she said again, to the pan, to the kitchen, to the freesias outside the window. "I want that too." He came up behind her. He did not take the pan or get in the way. He simply stood behind her and put his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on the top of her head. And she leaned back into him, and they stood like that in the kitchen while breakfast cooked. "Your mother will need at least 6 months' notice," she said. "My mother will need 6 months to contain herself," he said. "The notice can be shorter." She laughed. He pressed his mouth to the top of her head. They planned it together, not with an event coordinator taking over and reducing them to a checklist. They sat at the dining room table on weekend evenings with things spread between them, color swatches, venue photographs, a handwritten list of names. And they made every decision together the way they made everything now. She wanted it outside. He wanted it small. They compromised, outside and small, and in the garden of a house in the countryside 2 hours from the city where the grounds were old, and the light in the afternoon came through the trees in the particular way that makes everything look like it was meant to happen exactly there. She wanted her mother at the center of everything. He wanted his mother next to his mother. Both mothers were contacted on the same day. Both mothers responded within the hour. Kyungja's response was in Korean, and Jae-won translated the printable portions. Andrea's mother, whose name was Grace and who had been waiting with enormous patience since the magazine cover for this specific phone call, said, "I will be on the next flight, give me the date right now," and Andrea had to talk her down to a reasonable timeline. The two mothers met for the first time 6 weeks before the ceremony and liked each other immediately in the competitive, warm way of two women who both believed they had raised someone exceptional and were pleased to find the other one felt the same way. Grace called Andrea the night after and said, "She is a very good woman. She looks at your husband the way a mother looks at something she made correctly." "She does," Andrea said. "And he looks at you," Grace said, "the way I hope someone would look at you since you were about 7 years old." A pause. "I won't say more than that." "Thank you, Mama. I will say one more thing." "Mama, he got you jollof rice on the first night," Grace said. "In a house that had never made jollof rice. I know because I asked Mrs. Han directly. He found a restaurant and had it sent before you even arrived." A long pause. That man was already in trouble before you walked through his door. Andrea sat with that after she hung up. She sat in the library in her favorite chair and looked out at the dark garden and thought about the first night, the tray, the smell of it, and a man who had made a calculation that was not a calculation at all. She went to find him and discovered he was in his study. She opened the door without knocking, which she had stopped doing months ago, and he looked up from his desk. "The jollof rice," she said. "The first night." He held her gaze. "Yes. You sent for it before we even arrived." "Yes. How did you know?" He was quiet for a moment. "I had Mr. Park look into you briefly before we signed. Standard process." He paused. "Your social media had a post from 6 weeks before. A photograph of a meal your mother had made. The caption said it was your favorite thing in the world after a hard day." She stood in the doorway and looked at him. "It had been a hard day," she said. "Yes," he said. "It had." She crossed the study and went to him, and he turned his chair toward her, and she sat on the edge of the desk and looked down at him. He looked up at her. She put her hand against the side of his face, and he turned into it slightly, the way he always did. The way she had learned was the least guarded thing about him. "You were already paying attention," she said. "I was already in trouble," he said. She kissed him. He pulled her down from the desk into his lap and kissed her back, and she held his face in her hands and thought, "This is what it feels like to be known before you have finished introducing yourself." The morning of the ceremony arrived with perfect weather that nobody had earned, but everyone received gratefully. The grounds of the country house were dressed simply. White chairs, lanterns not yet lit for the evening, flowers that were seasonal and honest and not overdone. Andrea had chosen them herself. She had stood in a florist for 2 hours pointing at things until the florist said, "You want it to look like it grew here." And Andrea had said yes, exactly that. She dressed in a room on the first floor with Grace and Beezy and 2 of her oldest friends who had flown in from different countries for this, and were currently managing between them to be both helpful and emotional in approximately equal measure. The dress was not the same one as before. That dress was in a garment bag in the back of her wardrobe at home, and she did not know yet what she would do with it, but she was not ready to make that decision, and J1 had not asked. This dress was different. Ivory, not white. Simple through the body, with long sleeves that made her feel covered and held. She had found it herself and bought it herself and not shown it to anyone. And when she put it on that morning and looked in the mirror, she felt like herself in it, completely, without apology. Beezy said, "Oh," when she turned around. Grace said nothing. She walked up and straightened something on the shoulder that did not need straightening, and then held Andrea's face in both hands the way Kyungja had held it the first time they met, and Grace looked at her daughter and said, "You are so beautiful. And you are so loved. And today is entirely yours." Andrea held it together. "Barely. Your mascara," Beezy said urgently. "I know," Andrea said. She fanned her face. She breathed. She held it together. J1 was at the end of the aisle. He was there when the doors opened and she first saw him, and he was already looking at her, had clearly been looking at the doors since before they opened, waiting. He was in a dark suit that was not a groom's suit from a complicated emergency. It was chosen for this day for her, for the light in this garden. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, and he watched her walk toward him the way a man watches something he has wanted for long enough that the wanting has become part of his structure. She walked toward him through the small crowd of people who mattered. Her family, his family, the people from their life who had watched this strange and real thing form itself over time. She passed Kyungja in the front row, who was pressing one hand flat against her chest and not bothering to manage her expression. She passed Mrs. Han, who had been invited because Andrea had insisted, and who was sitting with the rigid dignity of someone trying very hard not to be moved and failing quietly. She reached him. He looked at her face first, then the dress, then her face again. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. She had never heard it not steady before. She loved it. He reached out and took her hand, and she gave it to him, and his fingers closed around hers, and she felt the familiar warmth of it move up her arm. The officiant, a woman Andrea had chosen specifically because she had asked good questions when they met and listened to the answers, opened the ceremony. She spoke briefly about what it meant to choose someone not in a perfect moment, but in a real one. About how the most honest unions were the ones built from necessity and truth, and the gradual discovery that what you needed and what you wanted had become the same thing. Andrea watched J1 while the officiant spoke. He watched her back. When it was time for the vows, he went first. He had written them himself. She knew because she had written hers herself, and they had agreed not to share them beforehand, And when he unfolded the small piece of paper and looked at it, and then put it in his jacket pocket and looked at her instead, she knew he had memorized them, because that was the kind of man he was about everything that mattered. "I met you on the worst afternoon of your life," he said, "and possibly mine. And I made you a proposal that was entirely practical and not romantic in any way, and you agreed to it because you were brave enough to say yes to something uncertain when everything certain had just fallen apart." He paused. "I told you then that you were not a problem I had solved. You were a solution. I meant it as a business observation. I understand now that I was telling you the truth about something much larger than business." The garden was absolutely silent. "You taught me that a person can be a home," he said. "I didn't know that was possible. I thought home was a place you secured and maintained. You showed me it was something you chose, every day, because it chose you back." He held her gaze. "I choose you today, in front of everyone here. Not because I need to protect a reputation or manage a perception. Because you are the only person I want to stand next to for every difficult thing that comes after today. And the easy things. And the ordinary things which you have shown me are the best ones." Andrea pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose. "More pepper," he said quietly, just for her at the end. She laughed. It came out with tears in it. He almost smiled. The real smile, the one she had spent months earning. When it was her turn, she unfolded her own paper and held it and decided she could look at him and read at the same time. "You put jollof rice outside my door on the first night," she said. "Before I had told you anything about myself. Before I had given you any reason to be thoughtful. You found out what would make me feel like a person instead of a problem. And you did it quietly, without telling me, without asking for credit." She paused. "That is who you are. You take care of things before they become emergencies. You protect without making people feel protected. You love without making people feel managed." She looked at him. "I know that is not how the world sees you. The world sees someone powerful and controlled, and a little frightening. But I know about the salt shaker. I know about the freesias. I know about the pepper." She stopped. "I know you. And I am so grateful that the worst day of my life put me on those church steps so that I could meet you. Because I would walk through that day again if it ended here." Jaewon's jaw tightened. He held her gaze with everything he had. "I love you," she said. "I will love you past the contract and past the year and past every hard thing and through all the ordinary Tuesdays. You are my home too." The rings were exchanged. The same plain bands from that first afternoon, because she had said she wanted them, and he had looked at her when she said it like she had handed him something. The officiant said the words. He kissed her, both hands on her face, her hands on his chest, and the small crowd of people who had watched this strange love become real made sounds that people make when something true is happening in front of them. When they pulled apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. 16 minutes the first time, he said against her skin. Much longer this time, she said. Better, he said. Yes, she said. Much better. The reception was small and long and exactly right. There was food. Andrea had designed the menu herself, a careful mixture of what they both were, Nigerian and Korean, and everything in between that their life had become. There was music. There were speeches that made people laugh, and 2 that made people cry, and 1 from Bizi that did both simultaneously. Kyungja danced with grace at the end of the evening, and neither of them spoke the other's language, but they danced together with the confidence of 2 women who had decided they were friends and did not require words for it. Jaewon danced with Andrea. He was better at it than she expected. She said so. My mother, he said. Your mother taught you everything, she said. She would agree with that assessment, he said. She laughed against his shoulder. His hand was at her back, and they moved slowly through the last song of the evening, and she looked past his shoulder at the lanterns lit in the garden, and the people she loved most in the world gathered in one place, and she thought, I did not know this was what was waiting on the other side of that church door. She held on to him tighter. He felt it and held her tighter back. 14 months later, on an early morning in spring, Andrea sat on the edge of the bathtub in their bathroom and looked at the test in her hands. She sat with it for a long time. She felt it settle into her. She waited for panic. It didn't come. What came instead was quieter and steadier and much larger. She went downstairs. He was at the counter in his shirt, jacket not yet on, 1 hour from a meeting, coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked up when she came in because her face was doing something, and he had always been able to read her face from across a room. He put the phone down. She put the test on the counter between them. He looked at it. He was very still. She watched his face move through something enormous and come out the other side, and when he looked up at her, he was entirely open, every layer of composure set down. He came around the counter. He stood in front of her and put both his hands on her face. She put her hands over his. "The meeting," she said. "Is cancelled," he said. J1. "The meeting," he said quietly, "is cancelled." He held her face and she held his hands, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the window the garden was coming into its spring colors, and neither of them moved for a very long time. Their daughter arrived on a Thursday in November. They named her Soo-Yun Grace. Soo-Yun because Kyungja said it meant something about the world becoming brighter, and Grace because Andrea's mother had spent 40 years being exactly that, and they wanted the child to carry both. She arrived with dark eyes that looked immediately and seriously at everything around her, and a grip that Jae-won discovered when she closed her hand around his finger in the first minutes and did not let go. He looked at that small hand closed around his finger and went very still in the way he went still when something happened that was too large for his usual composure to cover. Andrea watched him from the bed. "She has your grip," she said. He looked up. His eyes were wet. He did not try to manage that. He just let it be there. "She is very small," he said. "She will get larger," Andrea said. "I know." He looked back at the baby. "I'm not ready for that." "You have time," Andrea said. He sat on the edge of the bed beside her, and she leaned into him, and they looked at their daughter together in the November light coming through the hospital window, and nobody said anything for a while because there was nothing that needed saying. The year Soo-Yun turned 2, she learned to say her father's name. Not Appa, which was what Jae-won had been quietly practicing with her. His name. She pointed at him across the kitchen one morning and said, "Clear as anything, Jae-won," in her small, serious voice, and Andrea had to leave the room because she was laughing too hard to stay in it. She heard him say from the kitchen with enormous dignity, "That is correct." However, more small voice. "A question, probably." "You may call me Appa," he said. "That is also correct." Silence. "J1, said the small voice again with satisfaction. Andrea sat in the hallway outside the kitchen and laughed until she was crying. He appeared in the doorway with the child on his hip and looked at Andrea on the floor. "This is not funny," he said. "It is so funny," she said. The child looked at Andrea and then at J1 and said, "J1, one more time," with a pleased repetition of someone who has found a very good word. He looked at the child. Something happened on his face that he did not attempt to control. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's right. The ordinary Tuesdays were the best ones." She had told him that in her vows, and she meant it more as the years went on. The Tuesday mornings when Soo-Yun climbed into their bed at 6 and installed herself between them and demanded stories. The Tuesday evenings when he came home and the house smelled like whatever Andrea was cooking, and he came directly to the kitchen and stood behind her and looked over her shoulder at the pan. "More pepper," he always said. "You always say that," she always said. "I always mean it," he always said. It never got old. She didn't want it to. Some evenings she found him in the library, Soo-Yun asleep on his chest, both of them surrounded by the physical books he still insisted on, and he would look up when she came in and his face would do the thing she had loved most from the beginning. The thing that was trying not to become a smile and losing the fight. She would sit on the arm of his chair, and he would lean his head against her side, and she would put her hand in his hair, and they would sit like that until Soo-Yun woke up and demanded dinner with the authority of someone who had inherited the best and most inconvenient qualities of both her parents. On the evening of their 5th anniversary, Andrea found a card on the kitchen counter. Not a printed card. A piece of paper, folded in half, her name on the front in his handwriting. She opened it. Inside was a list. Not long. 12 items. The first one said, "The lily you were still holding when we met." The second said, "The way you walked back into that church." The third said, "The first time you made a goosey soup and didn't tell me what it was until I had already eaten all of it." She read every item on the list. Her hand was over her mouth by the 7th one. By the 12th, she was sitting on the kitchen floor because her legs had decided that was the right place to be. The 12th item said, "Every ordinary Tuesday." She sat on the kitchen floor and held the paper and breathed. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her on the floor. He did not say anything. He came and sat on the floor beside her, right there on the kitchen tiles, in his good trousers, without any concern for either, and he held out his hand. She put hers in it. He closed his fingers around hers. Outside the window, the freesias were up again in the garden. They came up every spring without being asked, reliable and honest, and smelling exactly like clean air, exactly like she had said they should. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He pressed his mouth to her hair. "More pepper tomorrow," he said quietly. "J1. Yes. I love you." "I know," he said. He squeezed her hand. I love you too. I have since the steps. She closed her eyes. Since the steps. She thought about a gray sky and cold stone and white lilies on the ground, and a man in a groom's suit standing a few feet to her left, not crowding her, not leaving, giving her just enough space and staying anyway. She had not known then what staying would become. She knew now, and she would choose it again. Every time. Every version of that day, every difficult thing, every ordinary Tuesday. Every single one. Thank you so much for staying with Andrea and J1 all the way to the end of their story. From those church steps to that kitchen floor, I hope every moment felt earned and real and worth the wait. Now tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment? Was it the vows? The list of 12 things? The kitchen floor? Or something quieter that stayed with you? Who do you think was wrong and who was right? Did J1 go too far protecting what was his? Or did he go exactly far enough? And what hit you hardest in this story? Please like this video, share it with someone who needs a love story that takes its time, and subscribe so you are here when the next one begins. This has been Afro-Korean Mafia series by Jasmine. See you in the next story.